Now that we know a little bit about how Katana and OWIN work, let's return to that brand new MVC5 application that we created at the beginning of this module and see where Katana plays a role. I showed you the assembly references earlier, but not where Katana is used. First of all, in the project, you'll notice there is a startup.cs. And indeed, if you open this up, this will be a startup class just like we had in our project. It has a configuration method, it takes an app builder, and it hands responsibility off to a method called configureAuth. Notice it's a partial class, so this method definition lives in another startup.cs elsewhere in the project. And here you can see the assembly level metadata that specifies the startup class to be used. So Katana will find that attribute, find the startup class, instantiate it, invoke configuration, and we'll be able to configure the application. If I go to configureAuth, put the cursor there and press F12, we'll actually find the other piece of the partial class definition. Where is that actually? It's in the app start folder. The file name is startup.auth.cs. So it's the second half of the setup partial class definition. And inside of here you can see a couple middleware components being put into the pipeline. One is a middleware component provided by Microsoft Katana to implement cookie authentication. So it can check to make sure that if there is an authentication cookie, that it hasn't expired, that it can be decrypted into a valid authentication ticket. Another piece of middleware to use external sign-in cookies, and also middleware if you want to use Twitter, Facebook, Google, or Microsoft to let your users authenticate. More details on that when we get to the membership module of this course. But if you are interested in how this particular middleware is built, you can visit the source code for Katana. It's on Codeplex, so any search for Katana Project Codeplex should bring you to this page. Here you can always clone the source code using Git and pull it down locally and experiment with it. You can also browse the source code. Inside of the source folder, there's a lot of different subfolders. Each of these represent a different project. Each of these represent a different NuGet package. So it's very modular. But there's existing middleware components in here to provide features like compression, cross-origin resource sharing, diagnostics, cookie-based security, Facebook-based security, Google, Microsoft, and Twitter security. There's also middleware components that you can grab with NuGet to throttle requests. What sorts of things will throttling do? Well, if you look at throttling options, when you create this middleware, you can pass in some options that specify how many active threads there should be, and what's the length of time before a request starts to get rejected, how many milliseconds before we reject a request with a 503 response. And you can play with this code and tinker with it. The good news is now, when you look at something like the actual middleware implementation, you'll see the app func, just like we built it. Here's a constructor that takes the app func for the next component in the pipeline. It also takes some additional parameters. You can pass as many things as you want to the constructor, as long as you pass them in the use method when you configure the middleware in. And down here a little further, you'll find the invoke method. It returns a task. It takes an iDictionary of string and object. And it's working with those abstractions that are defined by OWIN. So these are just the middleware components that are part of Katana. There's also third parties building middleware components. And in the next module, we'll talk a little bit more about authentication and membership, which is where Katana is playing a role right now.